President Isaac Herzog, Excellencies, dear friends, it is an honor to be here with you. I'm humbled to have Holocaust survivors and their families with us today. And before we begin, I want to acknowledge that more than a year has passed since the appalling 7th of October terror attack by Hamas. We welcome at long last the ceasefire and hostage release deal. The deal offers hope as well as much needed relief. And we will do our utmost to ensure it leads to the release of all hostages. Since the beginning, we have asked for the unconditional and immediate release of all hostages and to a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. Dear friends, every year on this day, we come together to mark the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. We mourn the 6 million Jews murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators as they sought to destroy an entire people. We grieve the Roma and Sinti, also targeted for genocide, the people with disabilities, LGBTIQ+ people, and all those enslaved, persecuted, tortured, and killed. We stand alongside victims, survivors, and their families, and we renew our resolve never to forget the atrocities that so outraged the conscience of humankind, and never to forget their putrid foundations, millennia of anti-Semitic hate, manifest in marginalization, discrimination, expulsions, and murder. Dear friends, this year our commemoration marks a milestone. 80 years ago, the Holocaust ended, and our efforts began to keep the terrible truth alive, building on the work of those who chronicled Nazi atrocities as they were perpetrated around them and against them. The courage of survivors in telling their stories has played an enormous role, and we are deeply grateful to them all. But the responsibility belongs to every one of us. Remembrance is not only a moral act, remembrance is a call to action. To allow the Holocaust to fade from memory would dishonor the past and betray the future. The extraordinary Auschwitz survivor Primo Levi, who bore witness to all he had seen and endured, urged us to carve the knowledge into our hearts, and we must. To know the history of the Holocaust is to know the depths to which humanity can sink. It is to understand how the Nazis were able to commit their heinous crimes with the complicity of others. And it is to comprehend our solemn duty to speak up against hate, to stand up for human rights of all, and to make those rights a reality. Dear friends, following the hell of the Holocaust, countries came together. They created the United Nations and our Charter 8 years ago, affirming the worth of every human person. They adopted the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, for which we owe a debt of gratitude to the Polish Jewish lawyer Raphael Lemkin. And they established the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the foundation of all international human rights law. As one of the drafters, Lebanese diplomat and intellectual Charles Malik said, the declaration was, and I quote, inspired by opposition to the barbarous doctrines of Nazism and fascism, end of quote. The dignity of every member of our human family is enshrined in that document, which draws from traditions around the world. It is a pure expression of our shared humanity. And in dark times, it remains a shining light. Dear friends, today our world is fractured and dangerous. 80 years since the Holocaust end, anti-Semitism is still with us, fueled by the same lies and loathing that made the Nazi genocide possible. and it is rising. Discrimination is rife. Hatred is being stirred up across the globe. One of the clearest and most troubling examples is the spreading cancer of Holocaust denial. Undisputable historical facts are being distorted, diminished, and dismissed. And efforts are being made to recast and rehabilitate Nazis and their collaborators. We must stand up to these outrages. We must promote education, combat lies, and speak the truth. And we must condemn anti-Semitism wherever and whenever it appears. And we must condemn all forms of racism, prejudice, and religious bigotry which we see proliferating today. Because we know these evils wither our morality, corrode our compassion, and seek to blind us to suffering, opening the door to atrocities. The United Nations has long worked to combat anti-Semitism through a wide range of activities, including our Holocaust outreach programs. And we recently launched our action plan on anti-Semitism, recommending the ways the United Nations system can further enhance those efforts. In these days of division, it is all the more important that we hold fast to our common humanity and renew our resolve to defend the dignity and human rights of all. Every one of us has a duty. The history of the Holocaust shows us what can happen when people choose not to see and not to act. And the Universal Declaration of Human Rights prescribes that every individual and every organ of society shall strive by teaching and education to promote respect for these rights and freedoms. Each of us must answer the call, denounce lies, resist hate, and ensure our common humanity overcomes division. These causes are at the very core of the United Nations. We will never forget, and we will never waver in that fight. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary General Guterres. And it is my honor now to invite His Excellency, Mr. Philemon Yang, President of the 79th session of the General Assembly, to deliver remarks. Your Excellency.
Your Excellency, Isaac Herzog, President of the State of Israel, Mr. Secretary General of the United Nations, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome all of you to this occasion. We gather here today on International Holocaust Remembrance Day to solemnly commemorate one of the darkest chapters in human history. This year is particularly significant, marking 80 years since the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, a name etched in our collective memory as a symbol of unimaginable cruelty, brutality that can never be forgotten. It also marks 80 years since the end of the World War, Second World War, and the founding of the United Nations. This organization was created to prevent such atrocities and to build a world where human rights are upheld and all people live with dignity and peace. Today we honor the memory of 6 million Jewish men, women, and children, as well as the Roma, the Sinti, and countless other groups of people who perished in the Holocaust. Some survivors of this atrocity are here with us today. Mr. Dumitru Miklescu, Ms. Marian Moller, and Ms. Ginger Lane. Their courage in standing before us, even as they confront, remind us of the unimaginable brutality they endured, commands our deepest respect. They are living witnesses to the catastrophic consequences of unchecked hatred and barbarism. The preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, forged in the aftermath of this tragedy, reminds us, and I quote, "Disregard and contempt for human rights have resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind," end of quote. Similarly, it was our shared revulsion at the crime of genocide that led to the adoption of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, a solemn commitment by the global community to ensure that such horrors are never repeated. The moral imperative before us is clear. We must build a future where our commitment to human dignity is absolute and uncompromising. Indeed, as President of the General Assembly, I hold the respect for human dignity as one of my core principles. Throughout the 79th session, I remain committed to supporting efforts to build a future grounded in peace, security, justice, and equality for all. Central to this objective is education and vigilance against all forms of prejudice and hate, including anti-Semitism. It is equally our responsibility to guard against historical distortions such as Holocaust denial. To ignore the overwhelming evidence of this brutal chapter in human history, from gas chambers to the testimonies of survivors and even perpetrators, is to risk repeating such atrocities. We must never forget that the Holocaust did not begin in the gas chambers. It began in the minds of human beings, fueled by hate speech, propaganda, and systemic discrimination. It was the devastating result of allowing hatred and dehumanization to take root, fueled by indifference and apathy. It should alarm us deeply that today we are witnessing a resurgence of hate speech, anti-Semitism, xenophobia, and discrimination in all its forms across many parts of the world. Equally alarming is the number of armed conflicts in parts of the world which have been marked by inhuman brutality, massive killings of innocent civilians, including women and children, and an utter disregard for international law, including international humanitarian law. Such practices in war should not be tolerated and are warning signs that we are treading a dark and familiar path, the very path we swore to abandon with the solemn promise of never again. Never again. I reiterate that education and raising awareness about these atrocities remains our most powerful instrument against the tide of hatred. By fostering education, raising awareness, and promoting critical thinking and empathy, we equip future generations to recognize and reject the seeds of intolerance before they take root. the survivors of the Holocaust, with their courage and willingness to recount the unimaginable suffering they endured, play an indispensable role in this effort. In fact, no person can conquer the human spirit. Survivors remind us not only of the horrors they experienced, but also of the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of preserving memory as a shield against future crimes and genocides. We all share a global responsibility to build a culture of peace, tolerance, respect, and mutual understanding. In memory of those who perished and in honor of those who survived, we must commit ourselves to creating a world where human dignity is cherished, a world where equality and justice prevail, and where the lessons of the past guide us toward a brighter, freer, and more just future for all. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, President of the General Assembly. I would now like to invite His Excellency, Mr. Isaac Herzog, President of the State of Israel, to deliver remarks.
Near my heart, I wear a yellow pin, a pin that symbolizes anticipation, hope, and a resounding cry for all humanity. Bring back our tortured children and elderly, our women and men, from the tunnels of terror in Gaza home to Israel. We call it the hostages pin. On the massacre of October 7th, 2023, Hamas terrorists attacked our people. They murdered, raped, and mutilated women, tortured, beheaded, and burnt innocent people and entire families, and kidnapped hundreds of them, men, women, and children. Amongst our sisters and brothers kidnapped was Omer Nutra, an Israeli and American citizen whose fate was unknown for well over a year. Omer's great-grandfather, Yosef Nutra, was a Holocaust survivor and a freedom fighter who survived the Shoah, the Holocaust, carrying just a few coins in his pocket. Louise, Omer's aunt, took her grandfather Yosef's coins and fashioned them into the yellow ribbon hostages symbol, surrounded by barbed wire. The coins that survived humanity's darkest hours became the canvas for creating a pin that symbolizes the story of a nation, a symbol of survival, a symbol of faith, a symbol of hope, a symbol of longing, a symbol of remembrance, a symbol of outcry, the outcry of so many generations calling for justice, for humanity. Omer's parents, Orna and Ronen Nutra, are here with us today. Like Ronen, Orna also comes from a family of Holocaust survivors. Her father, Simcha, is a living testimony to this day. For over 400 days, Ronen wore the pin on his lapel, hoping and praying for his son's return. A few weeks ago, the Nutra family received the devastating news. Captain Omer Nutra fell heroically in the Battle of October 7th. His body is being held by murderous terrorists in Gaza. I stand before you as president of a nation that is determined and proud, and yet anguished and incomplete. Although the Israeli people have been overcome with emotion, seeing 7 of our daughters at last emerge heroically from hell, still 90 Israelis and foreign nationals remain in Hamas captivity. We are anxiously waiting 6 more to be freed this week and awaiting all others. I call on all representatives in this General Assembly, all who consider themselves part of the civilized world, to throw your weight to ensure our hostages return to their homes, every single one of them. Bring them back home now. In one of the darkest days of the Holocaust, November 3rd, 1943, Rabbi Clonimus Kalman Shapira, the Rebbe of Piasetzno, was murdered by the Nazis in the massacre known as the Aktion Erntefest. Shortly before his death, the Rebbe composed a special prayer for his people, for our people, the Jews, who were at the hands of the murderers, the Nazis, and their accomplices. Here at the United Nations General Assembly, as President of the Jewish Democratic State of Israel, I wish to recite this prayer for the urgent return of all our sisters and brothers who are held in brutal captivity by murderous terrorists. The hostages are enduring subhuman conditions without essential primary health care, without Red Cross visitations, without any compliance with international law, treaties, or agreements. I will first recite the prayer in our holy language, our people's language in Hebrew, followed by English. ריבונו של עולם, האזינה לכל בחיינו ולענקת ליבנו. ראה את צערנו ועוניינו, והושיענו ממצוקתנו הגדולה. קרובי נפשנו, נשים וילדים, אבות ואימהות, אחים ואחיות, ושאר אחינו בני ישראל, נעקרו מתוכנו, הם לוקחו בשבי, ועקבותיהם לא נודעו. היה נא אתה, אל שדי, מגינם של כל השבויים, שמור עליהם מכל צרה וצוקה, תן להם כוח לעמוד בעינויים, ואמצא להם חיות, למען יזכו לשוב אל משפחותיהם. Amen. God Almighty, listen to the voice of our weeping and the sigh of our hearts. Our loved ones, women and children, fathers and mothers, brothers and sisters, have been torn from our midst. Be you, Almighty God, the guardian of all the captives. Protect them from all trouble and distress. Give them strength to endure torment and grant them life, so they may merit return to their families. Amen. Dearest Holocaust survivors, United Nations Secretary General Mr. Antonio Guterres, thank you for this meaningful invitation. President of this session of the General Assembly, His Excellency Mr. Philemon Young, Permanent Representative of Israel to the United Nations, His Excellency Mr. Dani Danon, and distinguished permanent representatives, ladies and gentlemen. Precisely 80 years ago today, on January 27, 1945, the gates of hell opened, collapsed. Auschwitz, the largest and most vicious death factory in human history, was liberated by the Soviet Union Red Army. In many other death camps, the horror continued for months until they were liberated by the Allied forces the Red Army, the American Army, the British Army, and the heroic armies of many other nations. 6 million Jews, 1/3 of the Jewish people at the time, were systematically slaughtered by the Nazis and their collaborators. It was history's most monstrous, sadistic, premeditated, and meticulously executed mass murder. Murder in gas chambers, in crematoriums, in ghettos, in death valleys, in death marches, in death camps, in the darkest, most abhorrent chapter in human history. Shmuel Gogol was born in Poland in 1924. After arriving at the Warsaw orphanage run by the great Polish Jewish educator Janusz Korczak, Shmuel was given a small harmonica as a gift. When he was taken to Auschwitz, he took the harmonica with him, but it was confiscated immediately upon arrival. When Shmuel discovered that another prisoner had a harmonica, he gave up his bread rations to hold the instrument once again. And so, in the heart of darkness, between the cracks of fear and despair, the melody of an orphaned Jewish child's soul burst out, a melody that would not allow hope to fade. One day, a Nazi guard heard the melody of the harmonica. He ordered Shmuel to participate in the Auschwitz Death Orchestra, to play music while Jews were marched to their horrific death in the gas chambers. When my cousins marched to their death in front of me, Gogol recounted, I closed my eyes and said, enough, I cannot look anymore. There in those moments he vowed, if he survived, he would dedicate his life to teaching music to children. From the darkest and cruelest of hours emerged a message of hope and determination to revive the melody of life. Shmuel immigrated to Israel and taught harmonica for many years. He returned to Auschwitz in 1990 on an emotional journey alongside pupils from the harmonica orchestra he established in Israel, and played there for the first time with his eyes open. There is a well-known Hebrew phrase, את המנגינה הזאת אי אפשר להפסיק. This melody cannot be stopped. The wail of the harmonica, the melody Gogol played in the Holocaust, became the melody of Jewish rebirth and survival. The sound of horror, grief, and death became, through the courage of many, including the survivors of the Holocaust, sounds of building, of life, of faith, of hope, the sounds of the State of Israel. Sounds of eyes wide open of a nation rising from dust and devastation, a nation continuing to live with all its beauty and strength, the nation of Israel. Tragically, in November 2023, just a few weeks after the October 7th massacre, Shmuel Gogol's great-grandson, IDF Captain Asaf Mastel, fell in a heroic battle in the Gaza Strip. He died defending Israeli citizens of all faiths and beliefs and fighting against terror in its darkest and most barbaric form. The story of heroism, the story of fighting to live, of justice and humanity, of the eternity of the Jewish people, carries on from generation to generation. Ladies and gentlemen, the Holocaust was the single most catastrophic disaster in the history of our people and the history of all humanity. Yet, from this unthinkable wreckage emerged a voice resounding throughout the family of nations, a voice calling for repair, healing, and building together, a voice that led to the founding of the United Nations and the international courts, and to the establishment of the State of Israel, an act supported by the family.
这一行动得到了所有国家的支持，这是彰显历史正义的行动。我感到荣幸的是，
processes. Sir Hirsch Lauterpacht, the uncle of my mother Ora, was a proud Jew whose family perished in the Holocaust. He served on the team that prosecuted the Nuremberg trials against Nazi leaders and officials who plotted and executed the greatest genocide in the history of humankind, the genocide of the Jewish people, the Shoah. Professor Lauterpacht helped establish the International Court of Justice, later serving on its bench as a judge. The man who saw with his very own eyes in the Nuremberg courtroom the cruelest of human beings, the Nazis who annihilated his family and sought to erase his people, this man was also the one who first formulated the legal definition of crimes against humanity. He did so out of deep faith and hope that the international institutions will forever be committed to preventing these heinous crimes from ever happening again to the Jewish people or any other people, and committed to delivering justice for the sake of all humanity. However, this moral and ethical lighthouse has been eroded time and time again. I recall such a moral lapse in November of 1975, when the United Nations General Assembly despicably declared the Jewish people's national movement, Zionism, a form of racism. I recall how 50 years ago, right here at this very podium, stood my late father, Chaim Herzog, as Israel's ambassador to the United Nations. He would later become the 6th president of Israel. My father served as a British officer in World War II, liberating and rescuing Jews from Nazi death camps, including Bergen-Belsen. He stood here on the memorial night of Kristallnacht, in which Nazi stormtroopers attacked Jewish communities, burned 1,500 synagogues, murdered and jailed thousands of Jews throughout the Nazis' Third Reich. As he delivered his monumental speech advocating for the entire Jewish people, my father tore up UN Resolution 3379, calling out the hatred, ignorance, and lies that enabled such a disgrace. It took 16 years for this assembly to revoke that shameful resolution. Today, we find ourselves yet again at a dangerous crossroads in the history of this institution. Rather than fulfilling its purpose and fighting courageously against a global epidemic of jihadist, murderous, and abhorrent terror, time and again this assembly has exhibited more bankruptcy. International forums and institutions such as the International Criminal Court opt for outrageous hypocrisy and protection of the perpetrators of the atrocities. They blur the distinction. They blur the distinction between good and evil, creating a distorted symmetry between the victim and the murderous monster. I ask you, how is this possible? How is it possible that international institutions, which began as an anti-Nazi alliance, are allowing anti-Semitic genocidal doctrines to flourish uninterrupted in the wake of the largest massacre of Jews since World War II? How is it possible that the moral compass of so many in the family of nations has become so disoriented that they no longer recognize the clear truth that just as terrorists use civilians as human shields, they also weaponize the international institutions, undermining the most basic fundamental reason for their establishment? How is it possible that the same institutions established in the wake of the greatest genocide in history, the Holocaust, are manipulating the definition of genocide for the sole purpose of attacking Israel and the Jewish people, doing so by embracing the despicable phenomena of Holocaust inversion? I want to be clear. We know for a fact, based on evidence, that the October 7th terrorists drew inspiration from Hitler and the Nazis and acted with all their cruelty to destroy our nation of Israel and its citizens. But the issue, ladies and gentlemen, is much deeper and reaches far beyond the October 7th massacre. We have all witnessed a huge volcano of anti-Semitism erupt following the massacre. This alarming reality was also reflected in the important report the United Nations just published about anti-Semitism. This is an urgent wake-up call to all humanity. Anti-Semitism, savagery, cruelty, and racism are still thriving on our planet. They are thriving because far too many states represented here do not confront them, do not unanimously condemn them, do not fight against them. Even more outrageous is a UN member state, Iran, explicitly scheming and acting to destroy a fellow UN member state, the State of Israel. Iran's fanatical leadership turned its country into a hub of anti-Semitism, hatred, and terror. It is developing weapons of mass destruction aimed at annihilating the only and one and only national home of the Jewish people, born out of the ashes of the Holocaust. The world cannot continue turning a blind eye to the global threat posed by Iran, both directly and through its proxies, and to the danger represented by jihadist terrorism. Enabling realization of these threats signals to past generations that we failed to learn the lessons of history, and signals to future generations that our battles will soon become theirs. This is a moment of truth for us all. We either bow our heads or unite and take action to halt the danger. Now we must, all of us, fight together, shoulder to shoulder and with all our might, against anti-Semitism, terror, and hatred. We must fight against the misuse of international institutions as a vehicle, threatening the very existence and right to self-defense of the nation-state of the Jewish people, the State of Israel. Under no circumstances will we accept, ever, any challenge to the Jewish people's legitimate right to self-determination in our land, in the State of Israel. It is time to acknowledge challenging our right to exist is not diplomacy, it is plain anti-Semitism. 80 years after the Holocaust, I stand here with deep faith and hope. Our nation rose from the flames of the crematorium, not to live forever by the sword, but to build, to repair, to add light, to heal. We have stood strong against our enemies' assaults, and we have always done so, and we do so today, in full compliance with international law and humanitarian norms. And no less important, we have forged alliances and peace treaties that have transformed the Middle East, and I pray for the day we will achieve peace with more and more nations in our region, and that all peoples of the Middle East, Israelis, Palestinians, and all others will live peacefully side by side. from the ashes of Auschwitz, we built a resilient, diverse, democratic society composed of a magnificent mosaic of Jews, Muslims, Christians, Druze, and Circassians, and peoples of many faiths and lifestyles. And we have contributed to humanity in countless fields. In Israel's declaration of independence, along with extending our hands for peace, we have committed our nation to the values of liberty, equality, and justice in faithful adherence to the principle of the Charter of the United Nations. This is because we believe in the power of partnership, particularly partnership between nations and peoples, to heal and build, a partnership which we belong to by merit and not by anyone's grace. On this historic day, we must commit to joining hands to defeat darkness and hatred and work together to ensure building of a shared future. This is the vow we must share, all of us, the family of nations, that what happened once will never happen again. Ladies and gentlemen, 94-year-old Eva Arben defeated death 3 times. As a child in the Theresienstadt ghetto, as a young girl who marched in the horrific march, Death March, in Auschwitz, and this year as a citizen of Israel, under a barrage of thousands of rockets from Gaza to Israel on her city, Ashkelon. This terror attack took her back 80 years. But Eva refused to leave her home. As she said to me just a few days ago, articulating profound words of faith, and I quote, "If I knew that tomorrow was the end of the world, I would plant a tree today. I would plant it with tears, but I would plant it and plant a tree." In the spirit of Eva, in the spirit of all heroic Holocaust survivors, including those who are with us today, we will remember the past, hold onto life, and never give up. We will continue planting tree after tree, today and tomorrow, trees of life, of future, of hope. Trees that symbolize fervent faith in the human spirit, triumphing over darkness in spite of it all. I know the journey may be long, but I'm full of hope. Hope about us, about our partnership, and about the days yet to come. May the memory of our sisters and brothers murdered in the Holocaust be blessed and engraved upon the heart of all humanity for eternity. Am Israel Chai.